Welcome to E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy, a podcast brought to you by the Empathy Collective, a consulting firm that helps business leaders inspire change, one conversation at a time. We are building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a blue-collar worker or white-collar worker, small business owner or corporate executive, you belong in this community. We have a special guest on today's episode. She was one of the first women to join the U.S. Naval Academy and the oldest of 9 children. Although she claims to not be a naturally empathetic person, I saw the tender side of her when she talked emotionally about the profound impact that the military had on her life and how she is helping other women feel more empowered when they pursue career paths outside the military. Bossy and direct, she was always a tough leader, but people remembered her for her impact. This conversation is a reminder that you don't have to be an empath to do good in the world. And there are many facets of effective leadership that still lead to employees who feel cared for. Let's welcome Mary Brigden, sailor, former naval officer, and corporate executive. She will tell us how she steered the ship in her leadership roles and how resilience helped her sail through choppy waters. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Welcome to the show, Mary. It's really a delight to have you here. I know we've had some chats before this, and I've had a little insight into your personal story, and I'm really excited on behalf of my listeners that we can share this story more widely because it's a really cool one. So welcome.
Thank you.
So let's just talk about your story. So you told me when we spoke last that you were 17 years old when you joined the Naval Academy. Why did you decide to join at such a young age? And you told me you were also one of the only women in the Naval Academy at the time. What was that like? Tell me about that experience.
Well, I would start with ignorance is bliss. And when you're 17, you are kind of ignorant of the bigger world around you. I was accustomed to being part of a big crowd, being one of a large family. And I wasn't actually interested in the Naval Academy. I didn't know anything about it. So that's what I mean by ignorance. Looking back, a lot of people who go there are generational parents and grandparents went to the Naval Academy. They were a military brat. They lived that life. Nothing like that for me. But I did know they had a good sailing team. And that was something that pulled me in and was a trend in my life, that sailing kind of helped me with life choices and tipped the balance of, oh, I'm going that way, not this way. And then when I started to learn about it, I have to say I loved the challenge of it. It sounded hard. It sounded different. I liked being different. I wanted to stand out. I wanted to make my mark. And even learning that they had just admitted women, I was like, I was going to an all-girls Catholic high school. That sounds different. And I was in the second class of women. So I definitely felt very invincible. It didn't trouble me at all. I thought I'll just give it a try. Probably what did make me nervous was all of the physical aspects of it, because I was a great sailor, but that didn't make me a great athlete. And so I was a little anxious about some of that. And I was probably right to be. I probably wasn't as prepared as I needed to be, but I loved the challenge. I loved the opportunity that it represented of doing something very different. I also love that it lightened the load on my family. I'm one of 9 kids. It was one less expensive college for my parents to think about. So all of those aspects were somewhat appealing. And then when I got there, it was so different. It was so much different than anything I'd possibly imagined, starting with, oh, you get up at 5 in the morning? I mean, if I was out of bed at 7:15, I was doing pretty good. You guys get up at 5 and that's normal? That's not normal. And, and right on, marching on from there, less marching. And this whole idea of people yelling at you and that was going to make you be better. And like, I don't really get any of this. But again, ignorance was bliss, and and I definitely have a stubborn streak, and that helped me to stick it out. And I think what shocked me was they were all up in arms about the fact that I was a woman, and I honestly would think this all the time. I've been a woman my whole life. This has never been the response. It's never been a big issue. What is happening with this group? What is their problem? It's my problem. And I definitely felt like they're just weird. I'm just going to go do my thing. I was in sort of a unique position where sailing, you think of sailing in the Navy, that was a sport that had some cachet, perhaps, even if people didn't do it or know much about it. So it gave me sort of an island, I would say, of, a place I could go and know I was going to be good or be able to stand out or feel secure. So that, that offered me a little bit of a home base in a very foreign environment. And I also had a roommate that I was very close to who was the opposite of me. She was third generation Naval Academy. She knew everything there was to know. She was very talented, and we were the only women in our company of 120 guys for 3 of the 4 years that we were there. And so, the fact that I had that close relationship was invaluable for me and gave me another home base from which I could work from. As time marched on, I definitely had to learn how to cope with the isolating factor of it. The fact that we were so different, that we stood out. Usually you were the only girl in your class, you were the only girl doing this or doing that. It sounds fun at the beginning, it isn't so fun after you get going with it. And so that affected me and was new for me as someone coming from a home where I never remembered being alone at any time. And that determination to march on when you're alone or singular or taking a position that might not be popular um, was something I had to really think hard about. Maybe later had to rethink, and later in my career, I think it kind of set me up for survivorship, but maybe not optimal success, and had to kind of recalibrate some of that later on in my career.
It's fascinating to me that you grew up in a household with so many other siblings. And then, like you said, you moved into this environment where you felt an intense sense of isolation. I'm sure you learned from both of those environments different things. Let's start with having that many siblings. What did you learn being in such a large household as a child?
That it was not all about you, but also the joy that seeing someone else succeed could give to everybody, and that really helped me when I got to the Naval Academy, where it's really about putting the team before yourself. And most team sports is similar, learning that the sacrifice you make might not be for your own benefit, it might be for someone else's benefit, but to have a good team environment or a good family culture that when somebody benefits, we all benefit. It's good for all of us. And I was pretty fortunate in my upbringing that that was my experience. When you have 9 children, it spreads out over even a couple generations. So one of the things later in life that's been interesting is to realize that the upbringing that some of my younger siblings had was quite different from my upbringing. The circumstances changed, the makeup of the family was different. It definitely makes you aware of one another. So as you discuss something like empathy, you grow up taking care of little ones, getting their breakfast or doing whatever needs to be done. And you don't even think about it. It's just normal. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I only had 2 children, but I remember thinking, oh yeah, they're going to be roommates. They're never going to have their own room. And that was somewhat foreign, in today's world, children have their own room pretty regularly. And I just was like, yeah, no, I don't think that's so good. I think it's good to have to share a room and get along and just deal with one another on a regular, daily, hourly basis. Not sure they loved it.
Well, I'm sure if I asked them the same question I just asked you, what did you learn from your childhood? So, being in the same room, and I'm sure they would have very interesting insights that they've taken into their adulthood. That's fascinating to me that you grew up in that type of household where you're always helping each other out and lending a hand, and then you move into this environment where you're essentially a minority and you
Mm-hmm.
feel this sense of isolation. Obviously you had a roommate that you latched onto and you had a nice relationship with. How else did you cope with that isolation or try to find community?
Well, community was tough. It was actually frowned upon to gather as a group of women. You could gather as part of your company, which was essentially your professional unit. We lived in these companies, which were a bunch of guys that worked with the other women. And so an interesting community was the hairdresser. They had one woman who cut all the women's hair. And then they had 3 barber shops that cut all the men's hair. And going down to get your haircut was a wonderful little break. Oh, this feels somewhat normal. Nothing else feels normal, but this does. And you would generally see another woman and you could have a conversation, but those were hard to come by. And I remember learning when I went back later as an instructor, they said, yeah, one of the first things that we learned is that the women that were part of a team sport or part of a club like Glee Club or the marching band or something where they were going to have a sense of community with other women survived much better. That if you didn't have that going in, you were really going to struggle because the majority of your working day, you weren't around a group of women. And I remember really missing that community. Coming from an all-girls school, we thrived on that. That was bread and butter to us. and
Sure.
and just missing the joy of that was hard. What made what did help was in the summertime you'd go on these cruises, and generally there were very few opportunities. We couldn't go on ships. We couldn't do a lot of the things that women can do today. So they had to sort of invent ways for us to go on a ship. So they'd get this little training ship that they'd send a bunch of us out on. It wouldn't just be women, it'd be men and women, but the proportions were a lot more like, 40-60.
Mm.
And oh gosh, did we have fun. It was just fun. It was fun to just be a young person and be lighthearted and be yourself, and being around other women afforded that opportunity. So that was great. But you really had to look for it, and when you had the opportunity, grab hold of it and enjoy it. And one of the things as I look back is was laughter was so important. You had to really keep laughing. Isn't that true for life? And I did find at certain times in my life when things got harder, I realized I had lost my sense of humor. I didn't
Mm.
have things that brought joy into my life, and making a conscious effort to figuring out what will do that for you. At one point, kind of mid-career, now I'm working in the tech industry, it's pretty involved. I had a boss who said to me, I really kind of tend to bucket people into 2 buckets, those that give me energy and those that take my energy. And I work really hard at trying to keep the people that I work with in the first bucket. And if I've got people that are in that second bucket, how do I minimize the amount of time I have to interact? And I thought about that. I'd never tried to think like that before, but I think it's actually pretty simplistic, good advice, because I would apply it to humor. I'd realize that some people on my team, they're just goofballs. Like, they may not be the rock star, but they're darn funny. And I'm like, I really appreciate that. Hey, our whole team needs like a person or two like that. And really embracing that person and letting them feel like, yeah, you're just as important a part of this team as everybody else is, because we need some levity here and we need to not take ourselves quite so seriously. That's how I would cope with it, the sense of isolation at times. Go try something else. I did try doing different things that I'd never done before and made friends that I would never have made that way. Not that I stuck with it necessarily, but the friendships often did,
And you have briefly referenced your time in corporate too, and I think that's probably a nice segue into the next question I had for you. I'll just preface this question with, for all the listeners who are engaging with Mary for the first time today, when we first chatted, she was like, why are you interested in talking to me? I am probably the least naturally empathetic person. No one would define me as an empath. And I disagreed. I said, this podcast is designed for people who, yes, are natural empaths. Those people tend to naturally be attracted to this content. But really, it's for people who are curious and interested in how they can flex that muscle a little bit more even if it doesn't come to them naturally, to just be a more well-rounded, better human being in this world. And I think you are such a good example of that. You know, your whole leadership journey is fascinating. Clearly you've made a positive impact on a lot of people, and not without empathy being this core innate thing that's a part of you. You've learned along the way. And when we were talking last, I immediately thought of a conversation I had with Urs Koenig, who is a former United Nations peacekeeper. I interviewed him last year sometime, and he authored a book called Radical Humility. And the common thread throughout that book is be tender on people, but tough on results. So that was always his leadership mantra throughout his career. And I feel like you kind of represent that. You were always tough. You always said you were you were the tough person. You kind of took on your dad's way of leading. You said your dad was always tough, so you kind of role modeled that in your own leadership style. So being kind of the tough person on the outside, how did you strategically infuse empathy into your leadership style to make stronger connections with your people, with the people you were leading, despite the fact that you weren't maybe naturally leading with empathy?
Well, that's the part which makes me laugh because my first answer would be not very well. I definitely was pretty good at the tough leader and the results focused and the set a high bar. Come on, everybody, take the hill. That part I was good at that. And I was the bossy big sister. I definitely had no problem with that part of it. But I didn't necessarily let people in. And it was one thing when I was being the bossy big sister, because my sisters knew, that I was going to be there for them no matter what. But when you're with a group of guys that don't really know you and think you're kind of cuckoo or crazy or just a pain in the neck, they don't necessarily feel that trust or that bond and that confidence. And I had some pretty tough experiences, both when I was in the military and much later in my career, where it was something you learn it and then you relearn it and then you learn it again. And I would say feedback, number one. Feedback is so hard to hear. I really love the coaching that I received along the way of, feedback really is a gift. You don't have to respond. You don't have to be defensive. Just take it, let it wash over you and do with it as you will, including ignore it if it's just too much to take in or whatever. When you get feedback like that, and especially if I got feedback where I clearly had missed the mark or somebody was in pain and I didn't recognize it or didn't see where they were coming from, that went right to the core of my gut. Maybe I am an empath because that just crushed me. That idea that I hadn't understood the situation, at least from their point of view. And it might have been a little thing, it might have been a big thing. And it didn't really matter. The fact that you missed that on somebody that you really are sincerely trying to help feels terrible. And it really made me go, okay, how do I not let that ever happen again? How do I make it up to that person? Can I make it up to that person? Maybe you can't. But it influenced me and it made me slow down a little bit, try to listen harder. I love the question of humility. The leaders I admired the most were generally the most humble leaders I'd ever met. I wouldn't describe myself as a particularly humble person, but it made me try harder to go, okay, it isn't about necessarily being the best, especially if you're in a leadership position. It's about listening and figuring out what you need to do to help your team be the best, help that individual bring their best. And it's been a lifelong journey. I still think about it today. I'm in a group, I'm on a board with people, and it's like, well, why is this not clicking? What do we need to do to make this work? What can I do to help that person? My first inclination is, what can I just go do and fix it? I just want to get in there, fix it myself. And it's a harder decision to say, okay, I can't fix that. That's their job. How can I help them? And it's a constant choice, I guess, Rebecca, is just thinking through that, trying to make it not be about me, trying to accept the feedback and grow from it. One time I got feedback from an employee who said to me, Mary, you were the hardest boss I've ever worked for. I worked harder for you than anybody. And sometimes I just felt like you were so hard on me, but I always knew that you were doing it for me, that you thought I could do more. And it was that last little part that saved me. I was like, okay, I am a pretty hard boss. That part I totally acknowledge, but it was a real treasure to me that he added that last little part, that he felt like I knew I was trying to make him be better. What's tough is when somebody doesn't want to be better, because I can't undo that part of me. I really want to be the best. I want my team to be the best. And if somebody's like, yeah, I'm kind of checked out, I don't really care about that. It's like,
Mm.
you might not do well on this team. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. The other thing I realized is when I wasn't listening or wasn't hearing, I realized partly it was because I had isolated myself. One thing that did help me to become a better leader was being willing to be more vulnerable and more open about where I was or what the mistake I had made. And that took me a long time. I wasn't very confident with doing that for years, much longer probably than I should have been. And when I got more comfortable with that and recognizing that was a strength to do that, not a weakness, that was a big learning point for me, and it helped it come more naturally. So, and I guess the last one would be I'd come back to bringing joy into it. Like if we couldn't laugh,
Mhm.
it was going to be hard to get back to things. So I think those would probably be the two big adaptations I've made, is not to take myself quite so seriously and to allow myself to open up about maybe what I'm struggling with or why I missed the boat on that or why I was too busy to pay attention, and then to find a way to help us start laughing together, and it makes it easier to work together.
I love that you mentioned that because I actually conducted a workshop recently with a team, and the leader of the team mentioned just that. She said, I it's so important to me that we take the time to laugh because they're a customer service team and they're under such pressure, the call
Oh
volume
yeah.
constantly on the phone and difficult conversations with customers in many cases. So laughter was really important for her team just to stay sane. And I thought that was cool that it was coming from her as the team leader saying, we all need to laugh and we need to just take time to have a team meeting and say some jokes or something, because otherwise this could get really, really intense really fast.
Yes. Oh my gosh. In the customer success world, for sure. And frankly, if you're not about to laugh about some of the most ridiculous situations you get into, they are going to take themselves too seriously. It's like, oh yeah, people are crazy. I'm dealing with some crazy people.
A lot of emotions flying around. That's why we have these conversations, because we're all human, we're all emotional beings. And that just creates conflict sometimes. And we just need to learn how to help each other out and help each other cope. And speaking of which, I think we had some really good conversations in our last chat about how military life is so all consuming. I mean, you're such a tightly knit community. I'd love to understand, firstly, how you went from this military life into the corporate world. What did that transition look like? I spent many years in corporate and I don't feel the same sense of community that you probably felt in the military. What did that transition look like? And is it difficult for women or men really who want to transition out of military life into the corporate world? Like, is that challenging for them? But I'd also like to try to understand, especially with the push towards creating more inclusive environments in the corporate world or in workplaces in general. How can you balance the inclusivity part with also setting boundaries and self-care, taking care of your own well-being? Because I know we talked a lot about bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean? So there are two questions I have there around bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean for you? And the transition from military into corporate, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. These are such hard questions. And I will say, first of all, that experience of becoming such a tight knit team as part of the military was transformative. I'd never experienced anything like that. I'd never experienced the pride that you feel when you're at a patriotic event, maybe, or that flag goes up and you realize you are on the front lines. This group, this team is committed to one another to do what our country has asked us to do. Those are a big deal. And in the Navy, you spend a lot of months deployed and out there sacrificing. And so much respect for the people that are out there living that life and making those sacrifices. And coming back to the corporate world is and transitioning super weird. It's dysfunctional. And you're right. You do not feel that same commitment that you would feel towards your country and your teammate in corporate America. It's not the same. You might get rallied around a particular goal and a particular team or a competition or something, but it is not the same. And I guess the first thing I would say to that would be to pace yourself. When you transition out of the military and you're looking for that job, it's such a big decision. It's so hard to imagine that job. Maybe the job doesn't even make sense to you. You're like, customer success, what is that? And just to take each job as this is just a learning opportunity. Don't sign up for that job like that's your next career. Sign up for that job like I'm going to do this 2 years and I'm really curious to see what I'm going to learn from it because I don't understand, and assume that the job you really want might be the second or third or fourth job after you leave. And if you can pull that mindset into it, it eases the stress and the pressure that you might feel of making the right career decision right away and kind of getting you back in the mindset of, being perhaps a younger person earlier in your career and going, I can restart this boot. It doesn't happen automatically and it's not a set path. And just being open to it. Oftentimes people are getting out of the military because they have family priorities that need more attention that the military life doesn't even allow you to. It's like, yeah, no, you got to go for 2 years. It's like, no, that can't be the case. Well, just because you have a corporate job doesn't make those family pressures any lighter. And I think back to when I was pregnant with my first child and I had this doctor who was a young woman who was super impressive and she just said, well, I kind of go with the theory that you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once. So you got to choose, like this year I might be more focused on this and next year I might be more focused on that. So you might have to prioritize and shuffle those priorities a little bit. And I think that is true both for an individual perspective and also a leader's perspective. But that is a great question that I would ask, on my one-on-ones with my team, like, well, let's talk about this year. It took a long time. And in some of my work cultures, I'm not sure people could really be honest about that and say that something outside of a work goal was most important to them. But if somebody could say, yeah, I really want to hit this goal, but I also really need to be there for my kids or my husband or my parents. This is just a reality that I'm dealing with. And the more you can help me figure out the way forward, the better, because I want to do a good job here. I just can't do both at 100%, or help me figure out how we're going to make this work. It takes time before someone's going to be willing to open up to that level. But even if they're not being open to it, if you're at least open enough to appreciate that they're dealing with these different things and to give them space and lighten the load on that, you're helping that person. And that person will feel a sense of gratitude and a sense of wanting to give more to that job, even when that job is not what they want to focus on right now. But because you're willing to help them get through this hard time. And I didn't do this well with everybody. I think I did it well with some employees. I think I did it not so well with some employees, and maybe that's how I learned. We're just humans, as you said a minute ago. And I do think that we're living in a tough time right now where the priorities of work are a struggle compared to the priorities of family and what's around us. I just think we have to give each other some grace. Maybe I was a tough leader and tough on results, but when the same people want to come back and work for you in your next job and the next job, it's like, all right. And I suspect that those people were people that I let see into myself, coming back to that, willing to be vulnerable, willing to share. And if there were people that I wasn't willing to be vulnerable and share, it was harder for them to connect with. The other thing that I found gave me joy, particularly later in my career, was getting to know and understand younger people. Like as I've aged and become part of the older generation of workers, and I've got these younger generation of workers, and they seem perplexing to me. They're not the same as I was. Why are they not like I was? Why don't they just do this? Slowing it down and trying to understand where they're coming from. Oh my gosh, they're amazing. Like they're amazing in whole new ways that I didn't see coming. Realizing just how wonderful it is to get to know people where they are and who they are and No, they're nothing like what I was, but boy, are they fun or interesting or different or impressive. And gosh, that's a big life lesson, right? Right there. Just to recognize the value that people bring to the table. And it's something that has given me a lot of joy later in my career, and I wouldn't have anticipated that my slowing down and learning where they're coming from and why. And I say they like it's all one category. It's not. Everybody's different, but just repeating that behavior has yielded more benefit to me and more people that I'm just proud to know them. They're just amazing people, and they're going to do amazing things. I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, I love that reflection that you needed to slow down and just realize what was around you. You were surrounded by incredibly amazing people. And if you got to know them and understand their unique talents, you just hit this realization that you have this wonderful network of people around you who are supporting you or reporting to you and helping your team be successful. And I think it's so hard for leaders to slow down because it's so fast
For
paced.
sure.
And I know the subject of this podcast is how life isn't smooth sailing. And I think that's so true for all of us. And you were saying how so many of us go through different chapters in life where we might be dealing with aging parents or having our first children. And so we're all in unique situations that require different levels of support. And not every leader feels like they have time to acknowledge that. They're just pushing to execute and get things done. What would you say for someone out there who's maybe struggling, even on the verge of burnout, and just wondering when things aren't so smooth sailing? What is one thing that you learned from your military career and your corporate career that acted as your compass to navigate really choppy waters?
That's a great question. Your core values. So I put a lot of thought into this. Well, I didn't in the beginning. In the beginning, the military made it very clear. What is your duty? What do they want you to do? Who is going to do it with you? Like your commitment to your partner and your team was all consuming. You never would let them down. That came before taking care of yourself for sure. And then later, you get into different corporate cultures. Well, what does that corporation say their culture is? And do you believe it? What is the culture that you feel? What is the culture that your work environment translates to you? And how does that differ from what your inner compass says? And for me, there's this true north. I worked in sales. Sales is very motivated by money. Companies motivate salespeople by money. I'm not really necessarily so motivated by money. Like that isn't really who I am. And so I had to really think about that. Like, what motivates me and what makes me feel proud to be in this job or be part of this team and be part of this company. And am I at odds with my teammates or am I aligned with them? And really coming up with goals that I felt were true to me and true to our team goals, figuring out how do we make these meld together? How are your goals different from my goals? How do we both hit our goals and still get the job done? Is it possible? And being willing to talk about that, I think, is a no-brainer to me. Like that part, that might even be the opening where I would be willing to share more about myself, because I mentioned to you that I sort of created this wall around myself, and I had to start learning how to break that down and be more approachable and be willing to engage people when they didn't think they could relate to me at all. My inner compass was making sure that people took care of their families, that they didn't think twice about that, yes, the mission's important, but not that important, and you can do both. Yes, maybe we're not going to talk about that right now. This hour we're going to be focused on this problem, but let's get 15 minutes and have a cup of coffee and talk about these other issues that are really creating a lot of stress for you. But definitely be willing to have that dialogue about what are your core values, what are my core values, how are they different. I would say the whole that whole time frame with George Floyd's death and everything, I had two employees that were so affected by that. And it affected me, and it made me learn and appreciate in a whole different way what their upbringing was like, what their world was like,
Mm-hmm.
And I am so grateful for it. Like, to me, that was just an amazing experience to be part of COVID and that era, and listen to them and learn from them. It was a gift. You mentioned that we're focused on creating inclusive work environments. I don't know about you, but I don't feel the pressure. I feel like the world is acting against creating inclusive environments. That,
Yeah.
a lot of the recent actions that have taken place are hard for me to witness. And in that situation, I go, okay, well, this is my environment. I can only control my environment for my team and to make everyone feel valued and special. And that's important to me. And I make sure people know what's important to me.
I think that's great advice, to just focus on your span of control. And
Yeah.
if you're seeing everything blow up around you, yes, it's frightening, but you do have control over your immediate environment and the environment that you create for your people. And I think that's the message that we all want to communicate right now. For many of us who feel like things are spinning out of control and we're moving away from our values as a nation, I think we as individuals can be positive influences on our own environment at home and at work. So,
I think that's I think that's so important, Rebecca. And if I could translate that back to a military experience, when the world is very stressful and when the job is incredibly stressful, people look up to you for calm confidence. Like they may not trust the greater organization, but hopefully they trust you. And if you're presenting a stressed out, freaked out persona, their stress level is going to go through the roof. If you're presenting like, okay, yeah, this is going to be tough. We'll figure a way. We will find a way to do it. We'll do it together. We'll talk it through. We'll get there. It'll be okay. It puts everybody in a place where they can now engage and respond and handle things. A simple example that I remember as a junior officer, I'm always late. I was late today. I'm always late. And which is not a military thing. A military thing, you're early. Early is on time. And my son gives me a hard time about this. But anyway, so I'm rushing to the next meeting. I'm running across, and the senior chief stopped me and said, "Ma'am, stop running." And I'm like, "I gotta go." He's like, "Don't stop. You don't run. You walk. You walk confidently, but you do not run." And he said, "Everybody around you is looking at you. And when you're running, they're like, oh my gosh, something bad is happening. Whereas if you're walking confidently and determinedly, they're just like, yep, business as usual. Let's keep working." And that really sat with me. I'm just late. That has nothing to do with everybody else. And realizing it always has to do how you project, and keeping that in mindfulness. That was very interesting lesson for me.
that's an incredible lesson. I love that. Now I'm going to be very, very aware of when I'm walking or running.
Isn't it funny?
Yeah, people running through the airport trying to catch their flight. I mean, yeah, you kind of feel the panic on their behalf when you see that happening, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you
Yeah.
don't realize how you're impacting your environment. I mean, you had so many great tidbits of advice throughout this conversation. We talked about values, your internal compass, vulnerability, feedback, transitioning, and being easy on yourself when you're transitioning from one very different environment to another. So I certainly learned a lot from you today. I hope my listeners did too. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's been fun being here. And thank you for this great conversation. I'm excited about what you're doing in the workplace. I think we all need it, Rebecca. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you would like to learn more about the Empathy Collective, check out our website, theempathycollective.com. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.